It's my Thanksgiving picks for DraftKings and FanDuel, and we're starting right now. What's up, guys? Welcome to another daily fantasy sports video. If this is your first time here and you want to become a profitable DFS player and get better at betting, start now by subscribing to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything along the way. I just love you guys way too much to do a separate data sheet for the Thanksgiving slate. So if anyone's watching this on YouTube later, come hang out with us on Twitch next time. We're doing these first looks typically are live on Tuesdays, but we're also going through the Thanksgiving slate today. So twitch.tv/JoeHolka. Again, if you're watching this later, appreciate that. Definitely come hang out with us live, though. Ask some questions. So I will be in Arizona for the Thanksgiving slate. We were just talking about this before we kind of started recording this part of the video, and I'll be in Arizona, but I'm going to see if there's a way to get around it to still play the slate. We'll see. All my family's back in Arizona. And if you missed the stream, you missed all the polls. It feels like Mashed Potatoes was running away with our poll for kind of best Thanksgiving side. Doozy was giving me crap for calling it a meal, but a lot of people were in on stuffing as well. And I am personally not in on stuffing. But let's get into this slate, guys. This is my first time kind of looking at the Thanksgiving slate. I do think that there's almost always an opportunity in these type of slates to really focus on late swap as well. So we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the playoff weeks. But I do think that there is a huge edge in trying to attack these games kind of as they're kind of unfolding, right? So I think that if we wanted to make sure we at least had a little bit of equity left over, it's nice that we have the Saints and Atlanta game that is the night game. So the first game on the slate will be the Chicago Bears versus the Detroit Lions. The middle game, Buffalo at Dallas. And then, yeah, so the Saints could be the hammer here against Atlanta. But we'll talk about quarterback first. We're going to go position by position. Again, if you're in the chat right now, definitely feel free to throw any questions along the way. What's up, Steve? Hashtag Steve in the chat. I think there's probably some people that still don't get that joke. I just think it's so funny because I guess it was a couple weeks ago now, someone in the YouTube comments, which are basically the worst place on earth, by the way. Someone in the YouTube comments was asking, "Who's this Steve guy you're always talking to?" It's Steve. Steve in the chat. Steve's the man. All right, so let's take a look at this. Josh Allen back on a slate for us. That's nice. 38.5 rushing yards projecting him for. Like, you guys know me by this point. I'm really prioritizing these guys that can run. So as of now, it's looking like Matt Stafford won't be on the slate as well. So two of my favorite quarterbacks recently, Josh Allen and Jeff Driscoll. I was in on Jeff Driscoll pretty early. 5,500 seems like a pretty decent price tag for him. Again, I think he was roughly that in week 12 as well. Stafford definitely out. I believe so. I should probably check that before I start talking about it, though. I'd be shocked if he was back in this game. He did not practice on Monday. So it seems like, yeah, it doesn't look like he's going to be on the Thanksgiving slate. So I will say that Jeff Driscoll is dealing with a hamstring injury as well. So definitely something to keep in mind. Someone in the chat saying that he is questionable. So good to know. Matt Patricia says that Jeff Driscoll's hamstring is pretty sore still today, but he's walking around better. Good to know. Thanks for that code. Yeah, let me know all the news as we go through this, guys. I spent my morning putting this sheet together. Haven't completely caught up on all that sort of thing. So the thing that kind of stands out to me right away still is just like, wow, Drew Brees is just not pushing the ball down the field, huh? And he is the most expensive quarterback on the slate at 6,800, 8,500 on FanDuel. I will say they're a team that has been passing the ball significantly more than they were earlier in the season. So 69.4% over the last 4 games have been passing plays. So that's interesting. They do have the highest total on the slate as well, 28. Guess the Cowboys right behind them with 26, which is interesting. Both are about a touchdown favorite. Dak almost always stands out to me because he's someone that is pushing the ball down the field a decent amount. 9.6 adjusted average air yards. So that's interesting. Josh Allen this is a number that's actually gone up for Josh Allen in recent weeks. He was one of those ones that it was kind of, I guess, harder to get behind his true ceiling just because he hadn't been pushing the ball as much down the field, but he is recently, and it also is a pretty decent matchup for him. Dallas 21st in the league at defending the deep pass, so that stands out a little bit. I guess one of the things you could say about Drew Brees, if we're talking about kind of where to attack defenses, Atlanta still 28th in the league at defending the short area of the field. So say we want about Atlanta and their pressure rate, they have been a team that just historically has been pretty content just like letting plays kind of develop in front of them and then just tackling from there. So that's interesting. Yeah, someone asking about Trubisky. He's 5,300. I think my kind of an initial feel on that is that I'd probably prefer the Driscoll side of that, but Trubisky, yeah, I mean, I guess say what you want to say about him. Do you think it was you guys think Trubisky is back after last week? I'm still a little bit cautious, I think, with that one. But the one thing that is nice about Trubisky is you have a clear option to pair with him and Allen Robinson, who I'm sure will be shadowed by Slay, but we'll take a peek at that. 5,300 is a great price tag for him. Dak at 5,700 I think is super interesting against Buffalo as well, but again, probably one of the worst matchups on the slate. Fourth against the deep pass. That's interesting for Buffalo. So as far as like trying to target home favorites though, the only two on the slate, Dak and Matt Ryan. What do you guys think about Matt Ryan versus New Orleans at home as a touchdown underdog? Obviously he's not going to give you much on the ground, really kind of buried some people last week, and he's really, I mean, 6,400. I think he's probably, if your teams are behind and struggling, maybe Matt Ryan's the pivot if you end up having some Drew Brees teams. I guess that ownership could end up being relatively spread out in this spot. I think Josh Allen's the one that stands out to me, unsurprisingly. Especially like now we got this spot for John Brown. John Brown was in a pretty tough spot last week. Might be a decent kind of opportunity to get back on that train as well with a nice Josh Allen to John Brown stack. That's a favorite of the stream for sure. Someone saying Trubisky's going to be the lowest owned. I would agree with that. I think that exactly what Flash said in the chat as well. Matt Ryan just depends on how you feel about Julio as well. I think there's going to be tons of people that just refuse to go back to that, which makes it a really interesting tournament play. I feel like the week after Julio is chalk tends to just blow up out of nowhere. So could happen for sure. Cowboys on Thanksgiving. Yep. How did Ryan play the following week after the last benching a couple weeks ago? I'm not sure, man. Steve said that Brees, hashtag Steve in the chat, says that Brees had 8 20-plus yard attempts on Sunday. Nice. So maybe this number will be creeping up a little bit. That's good to know, man. I do think it's a better matchup for kind of the short area of the field, but certainly something that's relevant. Trubisky, not really that convincing against the Giants defense, so I don't expect much from him. And yeah, I mean, yeah, good call. It is a divisional matchup as well. It's stuff to pay attention to in this spot for sure. So at least we have this game a pretty decent conditions for most of these spots, I think, for sure. So that's nice to see. Let's move over to the running back position, which is a really interesting one on this slate. So I do have Ezekiel Elliott projected for the most touches currently on the entire slate. Not as much involvement through the passing game as someone like Alvin Kamara. One of the things that really stood out to me, and historically, of course, Atlanta is a team that we really want to target with pass catching running backs. They've been a lot better this year in that category. So I do think that it's a spot. Of course, we can still go to Kamara. 6 receptions is what I have him projected for currently. 18 projected touches on the ground. I mean, I still think that those are your volume guys on this slate. It's really not close. Have about the same amount of projected plays for both of these teams, so no issues with that whatsoever. Nice team total, I think, again, and similar to the Julio Jones thing. If people are just going to not go back to Kamara after he had kind of a rough start to last week, I think that would be something that would be a priority of mine for sure. Getting to one or both of these guys, I think, would be an interesting spot. I guess it's interesting, though. So if you think of Kamara as a running back, obviously, but more of a wide receiver, Atlanta, like I said before, they do struggle in the short area of the field, just not necessarily to running backs, which is interesting. Normally you see those kind of correlate, but they don't as much in this spot. So Zeke, someone that like didn't get in the end zone last week, but it was kind of nice to see him get a little bit more usage last week as well. I mean, he had over 100 total yards, I believe. I'm going to check that quickly. 7,400 seems like a decent price tag for him. Was basically unowned last week. He had 21 carries, but did have 4 targets in the passing game and 40 yards through the air. So I do think that that's, on this slate in particular, an interesting guy to kind of have some exposure to. It is in the second game. So I'm always a little bit hesitant, I guess, to kind of overexpose myself to the first game. I guess what's nice about that is it is some lower totals in that game. So Chicago only 20.5 points, Detroit only 18 points in that game. So maybe if people kind of they want to see their players, right? So you got to think of this as a slate where late swap is going to be extremely important. These are kind of my specialty. I love these because basically, if you're behind going into this New Orleans game, basically you just pivot to some lower owned guys, give yourself a chance. If you're ahead, maybe you stay on what some of the better plays are in this New Orleans game. So I think that that's pretty interesting spot. Maybe we'll look at some leverage plays at the end of this that might be super helpful. So outside of those top two guys, who are some guys we should look at? I'll give the first dibs here to the chat watching this live. So Gavin's saying like the Kamara screen game with pressure Atlanta has been getting. It's a good point. Atlanta bringing more pressure definitely could lead to a few more catches for Kamara. I like that call a lot. Read today Freeman trending towards playing. That's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, so like we have this situation where Brian Hill 4,800, Quadre Olson 4,100, really not giving either of them a ton of volume right now. Not super interested in that, especially against New Orleans. I don't really know how much really interest I would have in Freeman. Probably just a late swap type of option for me. So Cohen, someone wants us to look at Cohen. So 5K for Cohen. Okay. I mentioned that Atlanta's been a little better against running backs in the passing game. Detroit has been horrendous, 27th in the league at defending running backs in the passing game this year. So yeah, I don't hate the Cohen call. I think on this slate in particular, I'm projecting him for 10 touches, half of those through the air. It might be thin, but these smaller slates, I think that if you wanted to go there in tournaments, I don't know if he would be a core play for me, but it's always going to depend on what kind of salary we have, salary saving options we have at tight end and wide receiver for me. I agree with the person in the chat said that you're basically going to have to pick 2 or 3 of kind of the Zeke, Kamara, Julio, and I guess, Michael Thomas as well in that train. You can fit Julio, Kamara, Singletary, and Allen. Yeah, so what do we think about Singletary? 5,800 did have his first 100-yard game last week, I believe, of his career. So his usage has trended up a little bit, I will say that. Never feels great to play kind of massive, or at least a touchdown underdog on the road when it comes to the running back position. I also think that I haven't played Singletary once this entire year because Josh Allen just doesn't feel like someone that just he's not just going to check it down. He's probably going to run or he's going to throw it deep. So I guess, I don't know. He's not really getting like those layup kind of touches like someone like Christian McCaffrey does for when Kyle Allen is just like totally content just to check it down constantly. So I think he might end up being a price play. I think Singletary is at the very least interesting for sure. So I don't hate the call. Let's see here. Like as far as like the value side of things, like he's got to be in play, right? Tariq Cohen versus Singletary. Definitely think that I prefer Singletary in that range. What do we think about David Montgomery at 5,400? I actually think that's a pretty interesting spot. Like I haven't played Montgomery in a while either, but he seems a lot safer to me than Tariq Cohen when he's, a similar price. You know what I mean? I will say it's always kind of a tougher trend, like these division games in November, December. Like it's something we would try and avoid if at all possible. And yeah, David Montgomery has less than 15 carries in back-to-back games. He does still have 3 targets in each of those, so that's interesting at least. Maybe the volume is a little bit closer than I have projected here. Still feels like a decent spot for Montgomery at 5,400. I guess gun to my head, Montgomery versus Singletary. I think it's really close, actually. I probably would skew towards Montgomery, but I think it's very, very close. Someone was saying that Singletary is a safer play, but no upside. That might be true. Yeah, let's take a look at Latavius, Steve. That's not a bad call. So Latavius, 5,600. Again, team total, really high. So I think he'll be a lot lower owned than these other 2 guys that we're talking about for sure. Definitely haven't projected for less touches. I think I might actually prefer Latavius to Brian Hill, though, in this range, even with price considered. I think that there's probably more upside there from Latavius. It's an interesting one. So you might end up like being in a spot where you need to kind of get different in that last game. Maybe you pivot to Latavius and hope he kind of takes a couple of touchdowns there. And at that point, you might have much to work with. If you have Kamara in your lineup and you want to move to Latavius and figure out what you can do at wide receiver from there, that might work out. UNC, what's up, my man? How we doing? Scarborough. Oh, man. This guy, I guess I kind of get skipped over him, right? 4,700. He's a 0 in the passing game. So you guys know I struggle with players like this. I will say that I was a big Scarborough fan in preseason. I just don't know if he's the best DFS play. Like last week, basically what you got from from Bo Scarborough is what I think you'll get from him most weeks. So he's 4,700. I understand that, but last week he had 18 carries for 98 yards, no touchdowns. He did have one target. I don't know how. I mean, he didn't complete it for a pass, so I don't know if it was just a throwaway, but yeah, interesting. He's a thumper for sure. Hey, happy Thanksgiving, franchise. Appreciate you, man. I think that's pretty much it for me at running back, guys. We can kind of circle back to this when we talk about some leverage, but I think that it's pretty clearly, I think the value guys, Singletary, David Montgomery, those are going to be the chalk value running backs, I think. But I think Latavius, interesting pivot. You guys know me. I'm prioritizing getting Zeke and Kamara into a main team for sure. At wide receiver, the thing that really stands out to me, even last week, John Brown, he's 6,300. He still is by far the highest weighted opportunity rating player over the last 4 games. So weighted opportunity, target market share, and air yards market share. Shout out Josh Hermsmeyer and airyards.com. I mean, this is the metric I use for wide receiver when you're trying to predict events that are in the short term. I do think that going to John Brown, especially in this spot where Dallas does kind of struggle a little bit to defend the deep pass, I think that this could be a blow-up spot for John Brown. He seems underpriced to me. What do you guys think about John Brown? I wish he wasn't. I mean, it's tough. I like that he's not, at least in the first game. I think that Kyle Allen's going to be super popular. Someone was asking if the Thanksgiving's all about leverage. It is. I mean, it's a small slate, right? Like anything, it depends on what type of contest you're in. But I do think that John Brown is shaping up to be one of the underpriced guys on the slate for sure. Michael Thomas, 9,100. I mean, if you're trying to get safety and you're trying to kind of build in that floor that we typically do with running backs, I mean, it's hard for me to say it, but Michael Thomas still, I mean, he's got to be right there as far as guys that have a super high floor on this slate for sure. That game does shape up to be a decent amount of plays, nice total. We know how important team total is at the wide receiver position. So in on that, second highest weighted opportunity, 0.66 is a very high weighted opportunity, unsurprisingly. Yards per out run, again, consistently some of the best wide receivers in the NFL will pop into this. Interesting to see Randall Cobb here over the last 4 games. Michael Thomas, Randall Cobb, John Brown, Julio Jones, like those are the guys that are popping. Obviously some smaller sample for some of those other guys as well up at that range. So really interesting. My Graham, since we're Vegas besties, we need to watch Thursday Eating. I think summer pool party. I don't live in Vegas, buddy. I live in Minnesota. We do like Vegas, though. Might have to take you up on that pool party. Brown's a bit overpriced, but elite pivot to Ridley, who will be so popular. You think he's overpriced, Steve? I think I disagree. Gauge if Julio's out, if Julio is out as a way to get off Ridley chalk. Is Julio questionable? Julio's shoulder was not spotted at the portion of Falcons practice, open practice. Julio played through some issue. His Tuesday absence on a short week caused for concern. It's possible that Julio ends up being a game time call. So that's actually pretty big for the slate, guys. If we don't know Julio's status in the morning, he might be the pivot. If you have a Kamara team, maybe pivoting to Julio. So Julio, 7,300. Kamara, 8,100. Like, I would assume that people are going to maybe shy away because of what happened last week, but also because of the injury. So, yeah, good call. Would be so Julio to come in with a questionable tag versus Lattimore and Torch. Yeah. We've seen it before, right? Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice if we got a little bit of a price discount on him for sure. All right, so outside of those kind of top-end guys, I would agree with the person that said that Calvin Ridley might end up being the chalk here. It's probably going to be like on Eli Apple, decent amount in the spot. So Calvin Ridley is someone that typically doesn't perform super well in weighted opportunity. 0.59 might be one of the highest I've ever seen him. 6,600 is a price that definitely we can get there if we really need to. I think that he's a guy that stands out for sure. I think I prefer John Brown, just my first instincts. But yeah, I don't hate the Calvin Ridley call at 6,600. I think both of them will be pretty popular in that range. Harvin Jones at 5,300. That's an interesting one. I know it's in the first game, and his target share numbers have kind of been down at least a little bit. But yeah, I think that 5,300, he's shaping up to be a nice value. So Michael Gallup versus Marvin Jones. Let's kind of piece our way through that decision. So if Mari ends up kind of being shadowed by Tre'Davious White, maybe it is a Gallup spot again. I don't think anyone's going to play Amari, by the way, after his 0 catch performance. So again, home favorite, nice total. Gallup seems like a pretty awesome play to me. I know we're not actively trying to target Buffalo, but that's interesting. What I like, I mean, it's the same thing. I prefer Gallup in kind of a vacuum just because I would prefer not to kind of overexpose myself to the first game on a 3-game slate. Really interesting. Julio hasn't missed a game since 2013. Is that true? Cole Beasley. Yeah, let's look at Cole Beasley. I do think that the John Brown matchup, like, it shapes up a little better for him, but it's not like Dallas is horrendous against the deep pass. They're below average. They're basically average when it comes to the short area of the field. So yeah, let's look at Cole Beasley's 4,700. Doesn't that seem like kind of an expensive price tag for that guy? So Cole Beasley, him or Cobb? I think that I prefer Cobb, as crazy as that sounds. At home, better total. I mean, more projected plays. Again, like, Cole Beasley has suffered a little bit at times this year to see massive volume for the same reason that he doesn't, or that Josh Allen doesn't throw to his running backs. He just doesn't throw those short passes very often. The number that really stood out to me was Randall Cobb's yards per route run over the last 4. Wow, that's an elite number for him. His weighted opportunity is not near as strong, but that's a nice number to see from someone like Cobb. I could see him continuing to do what he's been doing, and really nice price tag for him. So I would definitely put him in that same range as Marvin Jones, Michael Gallup, as far as consideration for sure. Dallas hasn't been getting pressure, and QBs are killing them. Interesting. I mean, we like Josh Allen for sure. Yeah, and the value side of things, I might be on Cobb. I think that's really interesting. Let's take a peek at Russell Gage, because 4,500, that extra 500 might go a long way in this slate. I think you pretty much know what you're getting from him, though, right? He's kind of playing that Sanu role. I think he's pretty safe. Like last week, he had a ton of targets. I guess the people that ended up going there, I guess, to get a piece of that game for cheaper, well, we're definitely happy with what they got from Gage for sure. So he ended up with, let's see, 10 targets last week, 76 yards, 8 catches. So I mean, he did have 2 red zone targets as well. So I know let's not forget 2 weeks ago where he got that touchdown called back too in the end zone. So I still think he's someone that could be a cheap asset we could get if we wanted to have later exposure to this slate. So yeah, super interested in Gage for a little bit of a cheaper price tag than someone like Marvin Jones and Michael Gallup. Wims, if Gabriel's out, I don't think they play the same role, man. Wims is kind of a bigger player, at least in the preseason. He's basically the mayor of preseason DFS. So, yeah, I mean, I like Wims quite a bit. I don't know if he sees a huge kind of uptick in usage there, but let's see where I've got him projected as far as I've still got Gabriel in here for now. So that's probably one we're going to have to look at. Min price, though. Yeah, I only got him projected for 1 catch right now, and I'm not sure they really play the same role. Slayton could be an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, that's one we're going to have to kind of keep an eye on. I think that might be pretty much it for wide receiver. I guess it's such a small slate. There's really not a whole lot more to talk about. Allen Robinson, I kind of skipped over him a little bit. But I do think Allen Robinson's still very much in play, even though Darius Slay will be shadowing him, of course. So 6,700, he's probably a little bit overpriced. Definitely prefer John Brown, Calvin Ridley, probably in that range. Probably has a little bit more to do with Mitch Trubisky and him being in the first game than liking him significantly less than those guys, but I think he'll be a lot lower owned as well. Are you sticking a single entry for Thanksgiving or going to play more MME? I haven't made up my mind yet, man, because I'm going to be in Arizona. I'm actually going to have to probably register for these early, so to be continued on that one. I haven't played the 1,500 the last 2 years on the Thanksgiving slate, for what it's worth. Anthony Miller. Yeah, I could see Anthony Miller maybe getting an uptick in volume. 3,900, definitely some savings there. Pretty low weighted opportunity, pretty low yards per route run, but I think he's fine. You might need some sort of guy all the way down there if you wanted to really make some of these studs work. All right, let's move on to tight end. I don't want this video to get too long. So I think that tight end is looking relatively thin to me. So I think that Jared Cook is someone that we could be looking at as someone that could be a huge factor down the stretch. For the season-long people watching this, I think that if you scooped up Jared Cook, I think you're pretty happy with his last few weeks. Again, the thing that I think is super important at the tight end position, really trying to target these higher totals. He's run the the third most routes on the slate over the last 4. But no one's anywhere near him as far as his weight opportunity and his target share. So I think that Hockenson, Witten, sure, they're a lot cheaper. They're still running routes. I think it's pretty clearly Jared Cook as the best raw points guy on the slate. Hockenson, Witten, I think would probably be close behind. Maybe Dawson Knox at 2,900. Decent matchup. I mean, there actually is a decent matchup for Hockenson, for Knox, for who I guess pick one for Chicago. But I think that Hockenson and Knox decent spots for the cheaper end of things. Not a really high total for either of them. So I don't know if there's a ton of upside there. Hawkinson's someone I just think that Driscoll hasn't really been throwing a ton to anyway. So not as interested in that. Witten always seems to get there on Thanksgiving though. Hooper could play. Good to know, Code. Yeah, that's definitely something to monitor. So I think Jared Cook, if Hooper doesn't end up playing, could end up being super popular. Maybe that's something we can kind of go to for lower ownership as well, depending on what happens with Julio. Trying to get exposure to this Atlanta side of the ball if you are pivoting. I don't mind it. Blake Jarwin, that's kind of interesting that he's not running a lot of routes, but his yards per route run, pretty solid. Maybe a leverage play at 3K. Probably thin, though. How many targets did Jarwin have this week? I watched a bit of that game. I don't remember really seeing him much. But 3K, I mean, that could be something you would have to explore on a slate like this. He had 4 targets last week. I mean, I don't think there's a ton of upside there, but super low on play for sure. Hooper did work on the side, still limited. Don't think he plays. Yeah. So again, like for anyone watching this on YouTube, we're recording this on Tuesday. So definitely something that hopefully we have some clarity on as the week goes on. I think Jarwin's actually interesting if he really wanted to have a true punt. If Hooper's out, maybe Jaden Graham. I don't know. I wasn't super impressed with Graham so far. 3,100 though. Again, like him versus Jarwin. My initial feel is there's probably I probably prefer Jarwin. Both of these guys are probably thin in reality. All right, let's take a look at defense here. So defense, this is a spot where I think you would like to ideally get low ownership on a defense, especially a smaller slate. I like that New Orleans is kind of the last in the last game. I'm a big New Orleans defense fan, just the way they pressure, especially if Lattimore's back. Dallas defense is someone that I think is underrated for sure, just because they do pressure a decent amount. Josh Allen, he'll make mistakes for sure. Say what you, I mean, I'm one of the biggest Josh Allen truthers out there, but he will make mistakes, and Dallas is a team that will pressure a ton. The one thing that I do like to prioritize as well, though, is really having pass attempts on the other side of this game. So that's probably what would be the tiebreaker for being in favor of New Orleans, for me at least. So I think that that'd be interesting. Atlanta defense probably would just be a pivot situation for me for lower ownership. But we did see this team play really well against Brees recently, so that's interesting. If we wanted to pay all the way down, yeah, I think that I strongly prefer Atlanta to Buffalo. I think you could probably make a pretty decent argument for Chicago. I guess hate that they don't pressure a ton, but Driscoll is someone that will take a lot of sacks, and on a slate where we don't have a quarterback that just takes a ton. So Trubisky's someone we know we can target as well. So maybe Chicago is a decent play. Really interesting. Or maybe Detroit, sorry. Both of those ones probably in play in that game. I hate the idea of burning a defense slot in the first game, because I feel like that's where you should be trying to get your leverage. Let's talk about, I'm going to bring you guys back to full screen here and talk about some of the leverage plays I think that might be on this slate. So again, if we're trying to work through this slate game by game, which I think you should be, I would assume that the leverage is probably going to be, like I said, Julio Jones, Amari Cooper. I think those would be the guys that, maybe Allen Robinson. So at the wide receiver position at the higher end, those would be the guys that would kind of get you off of Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, Calvin Ridley, like that range. At running back, I don't love the leverage overall. I know Steve mentioned earlier potentially going to Latavius. I think that makes some sense for sure. If Devonta Freeman ends up playing, he might be someone that people just don't go to. So maybe he ends up being a decent pivot in that range as well. I would expect Montgomery, Singletary to be kind of the chalk in that range. So if Montgomery really gains some steam, maybe a pivot could be Cohen. I would imagine Cook's going to be relatively chalky. So like the tight end position, I think maybe going down a little bit to a couple of the guys we talked about. Jarwin maybe at the lower end of things would be decent, but keep an eye on Hooper. Again, people don't like to play guys coming off of injuries. So quarterback, I think that Josh Allen will be popular. I think him and Dak will take some ownership, but I think a lot of people are just going to want to try and get access to this higher total game. I think people are going to go back to Brees after Atlanta really shut him down. If you want to learn more about how to be a profitable DFS player, start now by hitting the subscribe icon in the bottom right hand corner so you don't miss anything. But if you're looking to take your game to that next level, I go live each and every Sunday morning at 10:30 Eastern time on Twitch. Come hang out with us, twitch.tv/Joe Holka. You won't regret it.